Welcome to today's episode of Secrets of the Past. Picture this. It's 60,000 years ago, and you're standing on what will one day become northern Spain. But the landscape around you is nothing like the Mediterranean paradise you might expect. Massive glaciers stretch to the horizon, their blue-white faces towering like frozen mountains. The temperature hasn't risen above freezing in months. Howling winds carry ice crystals that sting your face like needles. This is Europe during the last ice age, a world so hostile that most life has either fled south or died. Yet somehow, in this frozen wasteland, a group of stocky, powerful figures emerge from a rock shelter. Their breath creates clouds of vapor in the bitter air as they check their stone-tipped spears and survey the wide expanse before them. These are Neanderthals, and they're not just surviving in this ice age hell. They're thriving. For 400,000 years, these remarkable humans weathered ice age after ice age, adapting to conditions that would kill most modern humans within hours. They survived volcanic winters that blocked out the sun for years. They endured temperature drops so severe that even the mammoths struggled. They faced predators that make today's most dangerous animals look like house pets. How did they do it? How did a species with brains no larger than ours, with no agriculture, no metal tools, and no written language, manage to dominate Ice Age Europe for nearly 500,000 years? The answer lies in one of the most remarkable survival stories in human history, a tale of adaptation, innovation, and sheer determination that challenges everything we thought we knew about our ancient cousins. Today, we're going to uncover the secrets of how Neanderthals became the ultimate Ice Age survivors. Chapter 1. The Frozen World They Inherited. The Neanderthal, standing at the cave entrance, squinted against the brutal wind, ice crystals forming on his thick brow ridge as he scanned the horizon. In front of him stretched a landscape that would have been alien to his ancestors and terrifying to us. Welcome to Europe 400,000 years ago, at the dawn of one of the most challenging periods in Earth's climate history. To understand how Neanderthals became such incredible survivors, you need to understand the world they inherited. This wasn't the Europe of rolling green hills and moderate temperatures we know today. This was a continent in the grip of what scientists call the Middle Pleistocene transition, a period when Earth's climate became dramatically more unstable and extreme. Picture Europe as a land of perpetual winter. Massive ice sheets, some over a mile thick, covered much of Scandinavia and pushed deep into what is now Germany and Poland. These glaciers were so enormous, they literally bent the Earth's crust beneath them. The weight of all that ice lowered sea levels by over 400 feet, exposing vast landmasses that connected Britain to continental Europe and turned the Mediterranean into a series of lakes. But the ice sheets were just the beginning. The climate swung wildly between periods of extreme cold and brief, tantalizingly warm interludes. During the worst glacial periods, average temperatures across Europe dropped by 20 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit compared to today. In some regions, summer temperatures barely reached what we would consider a cold winter day. Imagine trying to find food when the growing season lasts only a few months, if at all. The forests that once covered Europe retreated to tiny pockets in the south, replaced by endless tundra and steppe. The animals that survived were either massive, fur-covered giants like woolly mammoths and woolly rhinoceros, or small, quick creatures that could hide from the cold and find scarce food sources. Yet into this frozen world stepped the early Neanderthals, descendants of an earlier human species that had somehow made it north from Africa. They arrived around 400,000 years ago, right as the climate was becoming more extreme. It was as if they had walked into nature's ultimate survival test. What they found would have challenged every survival instinct. The sun, when it appeared at all during the long winter months, hung low on the horizon, providing little warmth. During the brief summer months, the landscape would partially thaw, creating a muddy, boggy environment that made travel difficult and created breeding grounds for disease-carrying insects. The wind was constant and merciless. Without the moderating effect of forests, it swept across the open landscape with nothing to slow it down. This wind chill effect could make already brutal temperatures feel even colder, turning a day that was merely freezing into one that was deadly. Water presented its own challenges. Rivers and lakes froze solid for months at a time, forcing these early humans to find ways to access liquid water or melt ice and snow. In some areas, permafrost, ground that remains frozen year-round, extended deep into the earth, creating additional challenges for finding shelter and resources. The very air was different. The cold, dry atmosphere would have made breathing more difficult and increased the risk of respiratory problems. Every breath would have been a shock to lungs evolved for the warm, humid air of Africa. The low humidity also meant that any exposed skin would lose moisture rapidly, leading to cracking and frostbite. Food was scarce and seasonal. Unlike in warmer climates where fruits, nuts, and edible plants could be found year-round, Ice Age Europe offered very limited plant foods. Most nutrition had to come from hunting large, dangerous animals that were themselves struggling to survive. A failed hunt didn't just mean going hungry. It could mean death for an entire group. Perhaps most challenging of all, these early Neanderthals faced this hostile environment without many of the advantages their descendants would develop. They had basic stone tools, but nothing like the sophisticated equipment that later Neanderthals would create. They could use fire, but may not have been able to create it reliably on demand. They had to learn through trial and error, with failure often meaning death. The predators alone were enough to give you nightmares. Cave bears that weighed twice as much as modern grizzlies, saber-toothed cats with fangs like daggers, massive cave lions that hunted in prides and could bring down mammoths. These weren't just animals. They were apex predators perfectly adapted to the Ice Age environment, and they saw early humans as just another item on the menu. Competition for shelter was fierce. The few caves and rock overhangs that provided protection from the elements were also sought after by these massive predators. Imagine trying to claim a cave when a family of cave bears has already moved in for the winter. The evidence shows that early Neanderthals didn't back down from these confrontations. They fought for every shelter, every safe space they could find. The seasonal changes were extreme beyond anything we experience today. Winter darkness lasted for months in the northern regions, with only a few hours of dim sunlight each day. The psychological toll of this endless darkness, combined with the constant cold and the struggle to find food, would have tested the mental fortitude of even the strongest individuals. During the brief summers, different challenges emerged. The rapid thaw created massive flooding as winter ice melted. Rivers changed course overnight. What had been solid ground for months became treacherous marshland. Insects emerged in biblical proportions, carrying diseases and making life miserable for any warm-blooded creature. Yet archaeological evidence from sites like Boxgrove in England and Atapuerca in Spain shows that by 400,000 years ago, early Neanderthals were not just surviving in Ice Age Europe. They were establishing permanent settlements. They were processing large game animals with increasing efficiency. They were creating tools specifically designed for cold weather survival. They were learning to read the weather patterns and seasonal changes with deadly accuracy. What we're looking at is the beginning of one of the most remarkable evolutionary stories in human history. These weren't primitive cave dwellers cowering from the cold. These were the pioneers of cold weather adaptation, the first humans to look at an ice age and see not an obstacle, but a challenge to overcome. The sites they left behind tell stories of incredible resilience. At Terra Ameda in France, dating to around 400,000 years ago, archaeologists found evidence of seasonal campsites with carefully constructed hearths and windbreaks. These early Neanderthals were already developing sophisticated strategies for dealing with the harsh climate. At Bilzingselben in Germany, another 400,000-year-old site, they found evidence of organized living spaces with different areas designated for different activities: tool-making areas, food preparation zones, and sleeping areas. This level of organization suggests that even the earliest Neanderthals were thinking strategically about how to maximize their chances of survival. The animal bones found at these sites reveal another crucial adaptation: selective hunting. Early Neanderthals weren't just randomly killing whatever they could find. They were targeting specific animals at specific times of year, maximizing the nutritional return on their dangerous hunting efforts. They understood migration patterns, breeding seasons, and the optimal times to hunt different species. Tool manufacturing sites show evidence of forward planning that goes beyond simple survival. These early humans were creating tools not just for immediate use, but for future needs. They were stockpiling materials, preparing for seasonal changes, and developing specialized tools for different tasks. The frozen world they inherited should have killed them within a generation. Instead, it forged them into something new, something tougher, something uniquely adapted to survive in conditions that would challenge even our modern technology. They were about to embark on an evolutionary journey that would transform them into the ultimate Ice Age survivors. As we'll see, their story is just beginning. The harsh world that greeted these early pioneers would continue to shape them over hundreds of thousands of years, pushing them to develop not just physical adaptations, but cultural innovations, social strategies, and technological advances that would allow them to not just survive, but thrive in Ice Age Europe. They were evolution's answer to an impossible question: what does it take for a tropical species to master a world of ice? The answer was about to unfold over the next 400,000 years. Chapter 2. Built for the Cold. The Neanderthal woman crouched beside the frozen stream, her powerful hands breaking through the ice with a stone tool. As she worked, vapor rose from her breath, but something remarkable was happening. Despite the brutal cold that would have modern humans shivering uncontrollably within minutes, she showed no signs of distress. Her stocky, muscular frame seemed perfectly at home in this frozen landscape. This wasn't luck or just cultural adaptation. This was evolution in action. Over hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals didn't just learn to survive the Ice Age. Their bodies changed to master it. What emerged was a human subspecies so perfectly adapted to cold that they were essentially living, breathing examples of natural selection's most impressive work. Every part of their anatomy tells the story of survival in the world's harshest climates. Start with their overall build, and you're immediately struck by how different they were from both their ancestors and modern humans. Neanderthals were built like linebackers, but linebackers designed by evolution specifically for surviving in a freezer. The average Neanderthal male stood about 5 feet 5, tall, and weighed around 180 pounds. Not tall, but incredibly robust and muscular. Their bodies followed what scientists call Bergmann's rule. In cold climates, animals evolved to be stockier and more compact to minimize heat loss. Think of it this way. If you were designing a human for maximum heat retention, you'd want to minimize surface area relative to body mass. A tall, thin person has lots of skin surface area relative to their body volume, which means more places to lose heat. A shorter, stockier person has less surface area relative to their volume, keeping heat locked inside their body. Neanderthals took this principle to the extreme. Their limbs were proportionally shorter than those of modern humans or their African ancestors, another adaptation that follows Allen's rule, which states that animals in cold climates evolve shorter extremities to reduce heat loss. Their arms and legs were not just shorter, but incredibly powerful, packed with muscle mass that served a dual purpose. The muscle tissue generated heat through metabolism, and the shorter limbs reduced the distance blood had to travel from the warm core of their body to their extremities. But perhaps most remarkable was their barrel-shaped chest. Neanderthals had rib cages that were broader and deeper than those of modern humans, creating more internal volume for their lungs and heart. This wasn't just about looking robust. It was about survival. Their enlarged lung capacity allowed them to process the thin, cold air of Ice Age Europe more efficiently. When you're breathing air so cold, it can freeze the moisture in your lungs. Having extra capacity becomes a matter of life and death. Their skulls tell an equally fascinating story of cold adaptation. Neanderthal skulls were larger than those of modern humans, not necessarily because they were more intelligent, but because they needed more internal volume to house adaptations for cold air processing. Their nasal cavities were remarkably large and complex, creating a sophisticated system for warming and humidifying incoming air. Picture what happens when you breathe in air that's 20 degrees below zero. For a modern human, that cold air would hit the lungs and potentially cause serious damage. But a Neanderthal's enlarged nasal passages created a longer pathway for air to travel, allowing it to warm up and pick up moisture from the mucous membranes before reaching the delicate lung tissue. Recent computer modeling has shown that Neanderthal nasal anatomy was actually more efficient at conditioning cold air than that of modern humans. Their pronounced brow ridges and forward-projecting faces weren't just for show either. These features housed enlarged sinuses that served as additional air-warming chambers. Their large infraorbital foramina, the holes in their cheekbones through which blood vessels pass, were significantly bigger than those of modern humans, allowing for increased blood flow to the face to prevent frostbite. Even their teeth revealed cold adaptations. Neanderthal front teeth were larger and more robust than those of modern humans, and they showed distinctive wear patterns. They weren't just using their teeth for chewing. They were using them as tools, gripping materials while their powerful hands worked. In a world where losing the function of your hands to frostbite could mean death, having backup tools built into your skull was a significant advantage. The adaptations went beyond just anatomy to physiology. Evidence suggests that Neanderthals had higher basal, metabolic rates than modern humans. They were essentially running their internal furnaces at a higher setting. This meant they could generate more body heat, but it also meant they needed more fuel in the form of food. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy. Burn hot to survive the cold, but face the constant challenge of finding enough calories to keep the fire burning. Their muscle mass wasn't just impressive, it was functional heating. Muscle tissue generates heat even at rest, and when active, it can dramatically increase heat production. Neanderthal bones show attachment points for muscles that were significantly larger than those of modern humans. They weren't just stronger, they were walking heating systems. Recent genetic research has uncovered even more sophisticated adaptations. Studies of Neanderthal DNA have identified variations in genes associated with brown adipose tissue, a special type of fat that burns calories specifically to generate heat. While all humans have some brown fat, Neanderthals appear to have had genetic variants that would have made this heating system more efficient. Perhaps most remarkably, some evidence suggests that Neanderthals might have even developed a form of controlled metabolism that resembled hibernation. Their skin likely showed adaptations too, though soft tissues don't preserve in the fossil record. Based on what we know about other cold-adapted populations, Neanderthals probably had thicker skin with more subcutaneous fat for insulation. Their blood vessels might have been configured differently, with more sophisticated systems for redirecting blood flow from the extremities to the core when temperatures dropped. The evidence for these circulatory adaptations comes from studying the bone structure around blood vessel attachment points. Neanderthal bones show enlarged grooves and channels where major blood vessels would have passed, suggesting a more robust circulatory system designed to maintain blood flow even in extreme cold. Their hands and feet deserve special attention. These extremities are the first to suffer in cold conditions. But Neanderthal hand and foot bones show adaptations that would have helped them maintain function even in brutal temperatures. Their fingers were shorter and more robust than those of modern humans, reducing surface area while maintaining strength. The bones show enlarged attachment points for muscles that would have helped maintain dexterity even when cold. All of these adaptations came with trade-offs. Their robust builds required more calories to maintain. Estimates suggest Neanderthals needed 300 to 500 more calories per day than modern humans of similar size. Their enlarged nasal passages and sinuses took up space that could have been used for brain tissue. Their shorter limbs might have made them less efficient runners over long distances, though they were probably more powerful in short bursts. But in the context of Ice Age Europe, these were reasonable prices to pay for survival. The alternative wasn't just being less efficient, it was death. Natural selection had no patience for compromise when it came to surviving in one of the most hostile environments humans had ever encountered. What's truly remarkable is the speed at which these adaptations developed. While evolution typically works over millions of years, the extreme selective pressure of Ice Age Europe compressed this process dramatically. Within a few 100,000 years, Neanderthals had evolved from their African ancestors into beings so perfectly adapted to cold that they could thrive in environments that would quickly kill unprotected modern humans. They had become evolution's answer to the ultimate survival question. What does it take for a tropical species to not just survive, but dominate in a world of ice? The answer was written in every bone, every muscle, and every adaptation of the Neanderthal body. They had transformed themselves into the ultimate cold-weather humans, and they were just getting started. Chapter 3. Masters of Stone and Fire. The sound of stone striking stone echoed through the rock shelter as the Neanderthal craftsman worked with focused precision. Each strike was deliberate, calculated, removing exactly the right flake from the stone core in his hands. Around him, the orange glow of a carefully maintained fire cast dancing shadows on the cave walls. This wasn't random toolmaking. This was sophisticated technology being created by a master who understood materials, physics, and engineering in ways that would impress modern craftspeople. For 400,000 years, Neanderthals didn't just survive the Ice Age through physical adaptations alone. They became innovators, engineers, and artists of survival technology. Their mastery of stone tools and fire control represents one of the most remarkable technological achievements in human history, all accomplished without written language, formal education, or metal tools. Let's start with their stone technology, because what Neanderthals achieved with rocks would challenge most people today. They developed what archaeologists call the Mousterian tool industry, a sophisticated system of tool-making that required not just skill, but deep understanding of stone properties, fracture mechanics, and ergonomic design. The centerpiece of Neanderthal technology was the Lavalwald technique, a method so advanced that it took modern archaeologists decades to fully understand how it worked. Imagine trying to create a sharp, functional knife blade from a chunk of raw flint, with nothing but other stones as tools. Now imagine doing it so efficiently that you can predict exactly what shape your finished tool will be before you even start napping. That's exactly what Neanderthals mastered. The Lavalwald technique involved carefully preparing a stone core, mapping out in advance where each flake would be removed to create the desired tool. It required understanding the internal structure of the stone, predicting how force would travel through the material, and maintaining that mental map through dozens of precise strikes. But they didn't stop there. Neanderthals created specialized tools for every aspect of Ice Age survival. Hide scrapers with perfectly angled edges for processing animal skins into clothing and shelter materials. Spear points with aerodynamic shapes that could penetrate the thick hides of Ice Age megafauna. Cutting tools sharp enough to slice through frozen meat. Piercing tools for working with tough materials like bone and antler. Recent discoveries at Poggetti Vecchi in Italy revealed something even more remarkable. Here, 171,000-year-old wooden tools showed that Neanderthals were using fire not just for warmth and cooking, but as a precision manufacturing tool. They were using controlled burning to work boxwood, one of the hardest woods in Europe, into digging sticks over a meter long. This level of pyrotechnology required understanding combustion temperatures, wood properties, and heat control that rivals modern woodworking techniques. The implications are staggering. These weren't crude cavemen randomly hitting rocks together. These were sophisticated engineers who understood material science at an intuitive level that most modern people lack. They knew which types of stone would produce the sharpest edges, which heating temperatures would make wood easier to work, and how to combine different materials to create composite tools. Their mastery of fire goes far beyond what most people imagine. Evidence from sites across Europe shows that Neanderthals maintained fires continuously for months or even years. At Abric-Romani in Spain, archaeologists found evidence of 8 evenly spaced hearths lined up against a rock wall, a sophisticated heating system that would have kept an entire group warm through brutal winters. But fire wasn't just about staying warm. Neanderthals used fire for cooking, which revolutionized their nutrition and survival capabilities. Cooking breaks down tough plant fibers and denatures proteins, making nutrients more available and easier to digest. For people living on the edge of caloric survival, this increased nutritional efficiency could mean the difference between life and death. They used fire for tool making in ways that show remarkable innovation. Heating stones changes their fracture properties, making them easier to work and capable of producing sharper edges. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals were selectively heating certain tools to improve their performance, a level of technological sophistication that wouldn't be out of place in a modern workshop. Fire also served as protection against the massive predators that shared Ice Age Europe. Cave bears, saber-toothed cats, and cave lions might have physical advantages over humans, but they feared fire. A well-maintained fire could turn a vulnerable cave into an impregnable fortress, allowing Neanderthal families to sleep safely through the dangerous nights. The social implications of fire control are equally important. Firelight extended the useful day, allowing for tool-making, food preparation, and social interaction after dark. During the long winter months when daylight lasted only a few hours, this artificial extension of productive time was crucial for survival. Evidence suggests that Neanderthals were making fire on demand by at least 50,000 years ago, using techniques involving pyrite and flint that could produce sparks even in wet conditions. Strike marks on pyrite nodules found at French sites show distinctive patterns consistent with fire-making activities. This reliable fire production gave them independence from natural fires and lightning strikes, a technological leap that cannot be overstated. Their tool-making sites reveal sophisticated organization and planning. At Maastricht Belvedere in the Netherlands, archaeologists found distinct areas for different activities. Stone tool production in one area, hide processing in another, food preparation near the hearth. This level of spatial organization suggests not just practical thinking, but social cooperation and shared understanding of efficient workflow. The quality of their tools improved dramatically over time, showing that Neanderthal culture included knowledge transfer between generations. Young Neanderthals learned not just by watching, but through structured teaching. Tool-making mistakes found at archaeological sites suggest that experienced craftsmen were allowing beginners to practice under supervision, wasting valuable stone materials for the sake of education. Perhaps most remarkably, Neanderthals began to specialize. Not every individual made every type of tool. Some became expert spearpoint makers, others specialized in hide scrapers. Still others focused on fire maintenance and pyrotechnology. This specialization suggests a level of social organization and cooperation that goes far beyond simple survival. They also began to transport raw materials over impressive distances. High-quality stone materials found at Neanderthal sites often came from sources 30 kilometers away or more. This required not just knowledge of distant resource locations, but planning, logistics, and probably trade relationships with other groups. Their hafting technology, attaching stone points to wooden shafts, represents another major innovation. Using birch bark tar as adhesive, they created composite weapons that were far more effective than simple handheld tools. The production of birch bark tar requires heating birch bark in the absence of air at specific temperatures, a complex chemical process that Neanderthals mastered without understanding the underlying chemistry. Recent experimental archaeology has shown just how sophisticated these techniques were. Modern attempts to replicate Neanderthal birch tar production require multiple attempts by skilled craftsmen using detailed instructions. Neanderthals were doing this routinely, passing the knowledge down through generations by demonstration and practice. Their tool maintenance practices show long-term thinking that contradicts stereotypes about primitive behavior. Stone tools were carefully resharpened, recycled, and modified for different uses. Nothing was wasted. A spear point that broke could become a scraper. A worn scraper could be reworked into a cutting tool. This resource conservation was crucial in an environment where high-quality materials were scarce. The diversity of their toolkit expanded over time, showing continuous innovation under pressure. Early Neanderthal sites might have a dozen different tool types. Later sites show 30 or 40 distinct tool forms, each optimized for specific tasks. They were literally inventing new solutions to survival challenges as they encountered them. By 100,000 years ago, some Neanderthal groups were creating what can only be called art, decorative objects that served no practical purpose beyond aesthetics or symbolism. Eagle talons with cut marks, suggesting they were worn as jewelry. Shells with traces of pigment, indicating they were used as paint palettes. These artifacts suggest that even under extreme survival pressure, Neanderthals maintained cultural sophistication. Their technological achievements represent one of humanity's great success stories. Starting with basic stone tools and natural fire, they developed into master craftsmen whose techniques sustained them through nearly 500,000 years of Ice Age challenges. They proved that intelligence, innovation, and cultural learning could overcome even the most hostile environments. They have become more than just survivors. They have become engineers of survival, masters of the materials and forces that would determine life or death in Ice Age Europe. Chapter 4: The Hunt for Survival. The massive woolly mammoth stood nearly 12 feet tall at the shoulder, its curved tusks gleaming in the pale winter sunlight. Around it, a coordinated group of Neanderthal hunters moved with practiced precision, their stone-tipped spears ready, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. This wasn't a desperate gamble. This was the culmination of weeks of planning, tracking, and preparation. In Ice Age Europe, hunting wasn't just about getting food. It was about survival itself, and Neanderthals had turned it into an art form. For nearly 400,000 years, Neanderthals faced a brutal reality. In a world where plant foods were scarce and seasonal, meat wasn't just part of their diet, it was their lifeline. But the animals they hunted weren't the relatively manageable deer and rabbits that later humans would pursue. These were Ice Age giants, predators and prey species that had evolved their own formidable defenses against the cold and the dangers of their world. Picture the challenges they faced. Woolly mammoths weighing up to 6 tons with thick fur, and fat layers that made them nearly impervious to cold, but also incredibly difficult to kill. Woolly rhinoceros with horn spans of over 3 feet and temperaments that made modern rhinos look docile. Cave bears that could weigh 1,500 pounds and had claws designed for ripping through frozen ground. Aurochs, the massive wild ancestors of cattle that stood 6 feet at the shoulder and had horns like spears. Yet Neanderthals didn't just hunt these creatures occasionally. They specialized in it. Archaeological sites across Europe tell the story of a people who had mastered the art of bringing down Ice Age megafauna with nothing but wooden spears, stone points, and incredible courage. The evidence is overwhelming. At Schkningen in Germany, 300,000-year-old wooden spears were found alongside the remains of wild horses, not just one or two animals, but evidence of systematic hunting over thousands of years. At Laringen, also in Germany, a 125,000-year-old yew-wood spear was discovered lodged between the ribs of a straight-tusked elephant. This wasn't scavenging or opportunistic hunting. This was deliberate, organized, and incredibly dangerous predation. But how did they do it? How did relatively small groups of humans, armed with pre-Metal Age weapons, consistently bring down animals that could crush them with a single step? The answer lies in understanding that Neanderthals had developed hunting strategies so sophisticated they wouldn't be out of place in a modern military operation. First, they became master trackers. Living in small groups across vast territories, they developed an intimate knowledge of animal behavior that bordered on telepathic. They could read tracks in snow and mud like we read books, determining not just what animal had passed, but when, how fast it was moving, whether it was injured, sick, or healthy. They understood migration patterns, breeding seasons, and the daily rhythms of their prey. At sites like La Roche-Cotard in France, archaeologists found evidence of seasonal hunting camps positioned along known migration routes. These were random settlements. They were strategically placed hunting blinds that allowed Neanderthal groups to intercept herds at predictable times and locations. This required not just knowledge of current animal behavior, but the ability to predict patterns months or even years in advance. Their weapons evolved to meet the challenge of Ice Age hunting. The spears found at Schkningen weren't crude stakes. They were precision-engineered projectiles with carefully balanced weight distributions, aerodynamic profiles, and hardened points. The longest was over 8 feet long, designed not for throwing, but for close-quarters combat with dangerous animals. These were the weapons of hunters who understood physics, engineering, and the anatomy of their prey. But even more impressive was their hunting strategy. Evidence from kill sites suggests that Neanderthals developed tactics that maximize their advantages while minimizing risk. They used natural features like cliffs, ravines, and marshes to trap and corner their prey. At sites like Morin in France, archaeologists found evidence of systematic bison hunting, using natural cul-de-sacs where animals could be driven and then dispatched safely. The famous site of Roche de Saluder in France reveals perhaps their most impressive hunting innovation. Here, for tens of thousands of years, Neanderthal groups used controlled fires to drive massive herds of wild horses into a narrow valley marked by a limestone tower. Once trapped in this natural corral, the animals could be killed efficiently and safely, providing enough meat to feed entire communities through harsh winters. This wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary. These hunters had learned to use environmental engineering to overcome the size and strength disadvantages they faced. They were turning the landscape itself into a hunting tool, demonstrating planning abilities and understanding of animal psychology that rivals anything in the modern world. Their hunting groups operated with military-like precision. Evidence from butchering sites suggests specialized roles within hunting parties. Some individuals were clearly responsible for the initial kill, others for butchering, still others for processing hides and bones. This level of organization required communication, leadership, and trust that goes far beyond what we might expect from primitive hunters. The seasonal nature of Ice Age resources meant that successful hunts had to provide for months of survival. Neanderthals developed sophisticated meat preservation techniques that allowed them to store thousands of pounds of protein through winter months. They used natural refrigeration, burying meat in permafrost, storing it in cold caves, and even creating ice cellars that could preserve food for extended periods. But perhaps most remarkably, they learned to hunt the hunters. Cave lion and cave bear remains at Neanderthal sites show clear evidence of human predation, not just scavenging, but active hunting of the most dangerous predators in Ice Age Europe. Imagine the courage and skill required to deliberately track and kill a cave lion that weighed twice as much as a modern lion and had evolved specifically for surviving in harsh conditions. The nutritional returns from these hunts were enormous. A single mammoth could provide 4,000 pounds of meat, enough to feed a group of 25 people for months. But the risks were equally enormous. Evidence from Neanderthal skeletal remains shows injury patterns consistent with close contact hunting of large animals. Broken ribs, skull fractures, arm injuries. The physical toll of Ice Age hunting was severe, and many hunters bore the scars of dangerous encounters throughout their lives. Yet they kept doing it, generation after generation, for hundreds of thousands of years. This wasn't just successful. It was so successful that Neanderthal populations spread across Europe and even into parts of Asia, following the herds and establishing sustainable hunting cultures in environments that defeated most other species. Their success bred innovation. Over time, Neanderthal hunting weapons became more sophisticated. Composite spears with stone points appeared. Hafting technology improved. Some evidence suggests they may have used ladles, spear-throwing devices that could increase the range and power of their weapons. They were constantly adapting their tools and techniques to meet new challenges. The social implications of their hunting success cannot be overstated. Successful mammoth hunts required not just skill and courage, but social cooperation on a massive scale. Coordinating hunting parties, sharing resources, caring for the injured, and planning for future hunts all required social structures and communication abilities that demonstrate high levels of cultural sophistication. Evidence from sites like Kavsha and Skal suggests that Neanderthals may have engaged in trade relationships with other groups, exchanging hunting territories, sharing information about animal movements, and even coordinating large-scale hunts that involved multiple communities. This level of intergroup cooperation represents social evolution that goes far beyond simple survival. Their hunting success also drove technological innovation in other areas. The need to process thousands of pounds of meat and hide quickly and efficiently led to advances in toolmaking, food preparation, and storage techniques. The challenge of transporting heavy loads of meat and materials back to base camps drove innovations in logistics and possibly even early forms of sledges and travois. By 100,000 years ago, Neanderthal hunting had evolved into something that can only be called a sophisticated technology. They had turned one of the most dangerous activities imaginable into a reliable, sustainable way of life that could support stable populations across an entire continent. They had proven that intelligence, cooperation, and innovation could overcome any physical disadvantage. In the ultimate test of survival, hunting Ice Age giants with Stone Age tools, they hadn't just succeeded. They had excelled. Chapter 5. Shelters against the storm. The blizzard had been raging for 3 days, with winds so fierce they could knock a grown man off his feet, and temperatures so low that exposed skin would freeze in minutes. Outside the rock shelter, the world had disappeared into a whirling wall of white death. But inside, a Neanderthal family sat comfortably around their fire, warm and protected, working on tools and preparing food as if the apocalyptic storm outside didn't exist. This scene, repeated countless times across Ice Age Europe, represents one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements, the mastery of shelter in the world's most hostile climate. For 400,000 years, Neanderthals didn't just endure Ice Age weather. They conquered it through engineering brilliance that would impress modern architects. Their shelters weren't crude caves or random windbreaks. They were sophisticated structures designed with deep understanding of thermodynamics, structural engineering, and environmental science. These weren't just places to sleep. They were life support systems that made civilization possible in an ice age world. The challenge they faced was unprecedented in human history. How do you create comfortable living spaces when the outside temperature can drop to 40 degrees below zero? How do you stay warm when fuel is scarce and winds can reach hurricane force? How do you build durable structures when your only tools are stone, bone, and wood? The answers Neanderthals developed represent some of the most ingenious solutions in architectural history. Let's start with their use of natural shelters, because what they accomplished with caves goes far beyond simply moving in and lighting a fire. Take the site of Bruniquel Cave in southern France, where 176,000 years ago, Neanderthals constructed mysterious ring-like structures from hundreds of broken stalagmites deep inside the cave system. These weren't random piles of rock. They were carefully engineered constructions that required planning, coordination, and sophisticated understanding of structural principles. The Bruniquel structures show evidence of controlled burning, suggesting they may have been part of a complex heating and ventilation system. The rings are positioned to maximize air circulation while creating windbreaks and heat retention zones. This level of environmental engineering demonstrates that even 176,000 years ago, Neanderthals understood principles of thermodynamics that weren't formally described by science until the 19th century. But natural caves were rare and often occupied by dangerous animals. Most Neanderthal groups had to create their own shelters, and what they built would challenge our assumptions about Stone Age capabilities. At Moldova in Ukraine, archaeologists discovered the remains of structures built from mammoth bones that would have housed extended families through brutal winters. These weren't simple huts. They were engineered dwellings that could withstand Arctic conditions. The Moldova structures used interlocking mammoth skulls as foundation elements, creating incredibly strong bases that could support substantial superstructures. Long bones were arranged in specific patterns that distributed weight evenly and created frameworks for hide coverings. The engineering principles involved load distribution, structural stability, and wind resistance represent sophisticated understanding of construction that rivals modern building techniques. Recent excavations at sites like Abric Romani in Spain revealed even more impressive innovations. Here, Neanderthals created multi-room living spaces with different areas designated for different activities. Sleeping areas were positioned to maximize warmth from carefully placed hearths. Tool-making areas were located near entrances to take advantage of natural lighting. Food preparation zones were designed with drainage systems to handle melting ice and water. The sophistication of their heating systems deserves special attention. At Abric Romani, archaeologists found evidence of 8 evenly spaced hearths lined up against the rock wall, a heating system that demonstrates advanced understanding of heat distribution and air circulation. The hearths were randomly placed. They were positioned to create convection currents that would circulate warm air throughout the entire living space. But the real engineering breakthrough was their mastery of insulation. Neanderthals understood that staying warm wasn't just about generating heat. It was about preventing heat loss. They used multiple strategies that wouldn't be out of place in modern green building design. Animal hides were layered to create dead air spaces that provided extraordinary insulation. Mammoth fur was used as carpeting that created a barrier between living areas and the frozen ground. Evidence from sites like Kibara Cave in Israel shows that Neanderthals were creating sophisticated bedding systems using layers of different materials. Grasses and leaves provided cushioning and absorbed moisture. Animal furs provided insulation and wind protection. The layering systems they developed could maintain comfortable sleeping temperatures even when outside conditions were lethal. Their understanding of ventilation was equally impressive. Living in enclosed spaces with open fires creates deadly risks from carbon monoxide poisoning and smoke inhalation. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthal shelters, incorporated carefully designed ventilation systems that provided fresh air circulation while preventing heat loss. Smoke holes were positioned to take advantage of prevailing winds. Air intake systems drew fresh air through warming chambers before it entered living spaces. At Terra Amena in France, dating to around 400,000 years ago, archaeologists found evidence of seasonal shelters that were rebuilt in the same locations year after year. These weren't permanent structures, but they weren't random either. The positioning takes advantage of natural windbreaks, solar exposure, and proximity to water sources. This represents long-term environmental planning that required detailed knowledge of local weather patterns and seasonal changes. The construction techniques they developed were remarkably sophisticated. At Grotte du Rhin in France, Neanderthals were using binding materials made from plant fibers and animal sinews to create flexible joints that could withstand the expansion and contraction caused by extreme temperature changes. They understood that rigid structures would fail under Ice Age conditions, so they developed construction techniques that incorporated flexibility and resilience. Their tool-making areas within shelters show evidence of sophisticated workflow organization. Raw materials were stored in specific locations. Different stages of tool production were carried out in different areas. Waste products were managed to prevent contamination of living spaces. This level of organization demonstrates industrial-scale thinking that goes far beyond simple craftsmanship. Perhaps most impressively, they began to modify natural landscapes to improve their shelters. At sites across Europe, archaeologists have found evidence of Neanderthals digging drainage ditches, building windbreaks, and creating artificial terraces to improve their living conditions. They were literally reshaping the environment to make it more habitable. The social implications of their shelter technology cannot be ignored. These weren't individual survival shelters. They were community spaces designed to house extended families through months of isolation. The layout suggests sophisticated understanding of social dynamics. Private sleeping areas provided personal space. Common areas facilitated group activities. Workspaces were designed to accommodate multiple people working on different tasks simultaneously. Evidence from sites like Kausai suggests that Neanderthal shelters included specialized storage areas where food, tools, and materials could be kept organized and accessible. These storage systems required understanding of preservation techniques, inventory management, and long-term planning that demonstrates remarkable organizational capabilities. Their shelters also served as workshops, social centers, and cultural transmission hubs. The evidence shows areas designated for teaching young people tool-making skills, spaces for food preparation and sharing, and zones for social activities that help maintain group cohesion during long winter months when outside activity was impossible. The heating efficiency they achieved was extraordinary. Calculations based on archaeological evidence suggest that well-designed Neanderthal shelters could maintain comfortable interior temperatures even when outside conditions were lethal. They had essentially created artificial environments that allowed tropical adapted humans to thrive in Arctic conditions. Their construction materials management shows impressive resource efficiency. Nothing was wasted. Broken tools became structural elements. Used fires provided materials for construction. Even food waste was incorporated into building materials when possible. This resource conservation was crucial in environments where every material had to be gathered through dangerous effort. By 100,000 years ago, some Neanderthal groups were creating what can only be called architectural complexes, multiple connected structures serving different functions. Living quarters, workshops, storage areas, and ceremonial spaces were integrated into sophisticated layouts that demonstrate urban planning concepts that wouldn't be out of place in modern communities. The longevity of their sheltered technology is perhaps its greatest testament. Archaeological evidence shows that successful shelter designs were maintained and improved over thousands of years, passed down through generations of builders who refined and perfected techniques through constant innovation and adaptation. Climate data from ice cores shows that during the worst periods of Ice Age Europe, when temperatures dropped to levels that would challenge modern heating systems, Neanderthal shelters continued to provide comfortable, safe living environments. They had created technology that could literally overcome some of the worst weather conditions in Earth's history. Their shelters represented more than just survival technology. They were the foundation of Neanderthal civilization. These protected spaces allowed for tool-making, food preparation, social interaction, cultural transmission, and all the activities that made complex society possible. Without their mastery of shelter construction, none of their other achievements would have been possible. They had proven that intelligence and innovation could create islands of comfort and safety in even the most hostile environments. Their architectural legacy challenges our assumptions about Stone Age capabilities and demonstrates that human ingenuity has always been our species' greatest survival advantage. In the ultimate test of environmental engineering, creating livable spaces in Ice Age Europe, they hadn't just succeeded. They had created homes. Chapter 6. The social bonds that kept them alive. Deep in the Shanidar cave in Iraq, an elderly Neanderthal man lay dying. His right arm had been amputated years earlier, likely crushed in a hunting accident. His left eye was blind, damaged in another mishap that would have been fatal for a solitary individual. By any measure, he should have died decades ago. Yet here he was, in his 40s, ancient by Ice Age standards, surrounded by his family and community. Someone had cared for him, fed him, protected him, and valued him not for what he could contribute through physical labor, but for something else entirely. This is the story of Shanidar 1, and it reveals perhaps the most crucial element of Neanderthal survival: their extraordinary capacity for social cooperation and care. For 400,000 years, Neanderthals didn't just survive as individuals scraping out meager existences in hostile environments. They survived as communities, bound together by social structures so sophisticated and resilient that they sustained entire civilizations through the worst climate conditions in human history. Their social bonds weren't just cultural luxuries. They were survival technology as advanced and crucial as their tools and shelters. Understanding Neanderthal society requires abandoning modern stereotypes about cavemen living in isolated family groups, constantly fighting over scarce resources. The archaeological evidence tells a radically different story, one of cooperation, altruism, and social complexity that rivals anything in the modern world. These were people who understood that their greatest survival advantage wasn't their physical adaptations or their tools, but their ability to work together. The evidence for Neanderthal social sophistication begins with their care for the disabled and elderly. Shanidar 1 isn't unique. Archaeological sites across Europe and Asia contain remains of Neanderthals who survived serious injuries and disabilities that would have been death sentences for solitary individuals. At La Chapelle aux Ains in France, archaeologists found the remains of an elderly Neanderthal man who suffered from severe arthritis that would have made hunting impossible. Yet he lived to an advanced age, suggesting a community that valued and cared for its elders. This pattern of care extends beyond individual cases to represent a fundamental aspect of Neanderthal social organization. Chemical analysis of bones from various sites shows that disabled Neanderthals often had better nutrition than healthy individuals. Clear evidence that communities were actively prioritizing the care of their most vulnerable members. This wasn't just compassion. It was recognition that older, experienced individuals possessed knowledge crucial for survival. Consider what this meant in practical terms. In a world where every calorie was precious and every individual's contribution could mean the difference between group survival and extinction, Neanderthal communities made the conscious decision to support members who couldn't hunt, gather, or contribute physically. This represents a level of social evolution that speaks to remarkable emotional and intellectual sophistication. The Neanderthal approach to child rearing reveals even more about their social complexity. Evidence from sites like Kazan and Skull shows that Neanderthal children received intensive care and education that extended well beyond what would be necessary for simple survival. Tool-making sites contain evidence of children practicing under adult supervision, making mistakes that wasted valuable materials, yet adults continued to provide instruction and resources for learning. This investment in education makes sense only in the context of a society that planned for the future. Neanderthal adults were spending time, energy, and resources to ensure that knowledge and skills were passed to the next generation. They understood that their survival depended not just on individual capabilities, but on maintaining and improving collective knowledge over time. Their burial practices provide perhaps the most compelling evidence of sophisticated social bonds. While Neanderthal burial wasn't as elaborate as that of later human cultures, it was deliberate and meaningful. Bodies were placed in specific positions, often with tools or other objects that suggest beliefs about death and possibly afterlife. The famous burial at Shenadar Cave included what appeared to be flowers, suggesting that even 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals were engaging in ritual behavior that demonstrated emotional and spiritual complexity. But beyond individual care and ritual, Neanderthal society showed evidence of large-scale organization that enabled survival in incredibly challenging conditions. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthal groups maintained contact and cooperation across vast distances. High-quality stone materials, found hundreds of kilometers from their sources, indicate trade networks that span entire regions. These trade networks weren't simple resource exchanges. They represented sophisticated social agreements that required trust, communication, and long-term relationship management. Groups had to agree on exchange rates, maintain quality standards, and honor commitments over time and distance. This level of economic cooperation suggests social institutions that could manage complex relationships across multiple communities. The organization required for large-scale hunting provides another window into Neanderthal social complexity. The coordinated hunts at sites like Morin and La Roche-de-Saluder involved dozens of individuals working together with precision timing and defined roles. Someone had to scout prey movements, others had to prepare trap systems, hunters had to coordinate attacks, and support teams had to manage the processing and distribution of massive amounts of meat and materials. This level of coordination required leadership structures, communication systems, and social agreements about roles and responsibilities. Archaeological evidence suggests that different individuals specialized in different aspects of these complex operations, some as scouts, others as hunt leaders, still others as processors and distributors. This specialization is only possible in societies with sophisticated social organization and clear mechanisms for coordination and cooperation. Language played a crucial role in maintaining these social bonds, though the exact nature of Neanderthal communication remains debated. However, the complexity of their cooperative behaviors, from coordinated hunts to complex tool-making instruction to trade relationships, strongly suggests sophisticated verbal communication capabilities. Recent analysis of Neanderthal skull anatomy indicates that they possessed the physical structures necessary for complex speech. The evidence for Neanderthal communication goes beyond anatomy to behavior. The teaching of complex skills, like stone tool production, requires detailed verbal instruction. The coordination of large hunts demands real-time communication of complex information. The maintenance of trade relationships across vast distances requires the ability to convey abstract concepts about future obligations and agreements. Perhaps most remarkably, some evidence suggests that Neanderthal groups may have maintained cultural traditions that were passed down over thousands of years. Distinctive tool-making styles and techniques appear at sites separated by centuries, suggesting that knowledge wasn't just preserved within individual lifetimes, but transmitted across generations as cultural traditions. The social implications of their fire maintenance technology cannot be overlooked. Maintaining fires continuously for months or years required coordinated effort from entire communities. Someone had to tend the fires during the night. Others had to gather fuel. The logistics of continuous fire maintenance in resource-scarce environments required planning, cooperation, and shared commitment to group survival. Their residential sites show evidence of social organization that facilitated both privacy and community interaction. Sleeping areas provided space for individual families, while common areas enabled group activities. The spatial organization of their living sites suggests understanding of human social needs that goes far beyond simple survival. They were creating environments that supported complex social relationships. Evidence from sites like Kibara Cave suggests that Neanderthal groups maintained social hierarchies based on skill, experience, and contribution rather than simply physical dominance. Tool-making areas show evidence that the most skilled craftsmen had access to the highest quality materials and the best working spaces. This suggests social systems that recognized and rewarded expertise and contribution. The care provided to injured hunters reveals social values that prioritized group loyalty over individual cost-benefit calculations. Hunters who suffered injuries in dangerous activities that benefited the entire group received community support during recovery. This wasn't just humanitarian care. It was social insurance that encouraged individuals to take risks for group benefit by guaranteeing community support if things went wrong. Their conflict resolution mechanisms, while not directly visible in the archaeological record, can be inferred from the evidence of long-term group stability. Neanderthal communities occupied the same territories for thousands of years, without evidence of internal violence or social breakdown. This suggests effective mechanisms for managing disputes, allocating resources, and maintaining social cohesion under extreme stress. The seasonal nature of Ice Age resources required sophisticated social planning and resource sharing. During abundant periods, communities had to organize preservation and storage of surplus resources. During scarce periods, they had to manage distribution to ensure survival of all group members. This required social institutions capable of managing complex economic relationships over extended time periods. By 100,000 years ago, some evidence suggests that Neanderthal groups were engaging in intergroup ceremonies, or gatherings that served social and possibly political functions. Sites with evidence of unusually large gatherings and specialized activities suggest that separate communities came together periodically for social, economic, or cultural purposes. The genetic evidence for Neanderthal social structure is equally compelling. Analysis of Neanderthal DNA suggests that their groups maintained genetic diversity through structured mating patterns that prevented inbreeding while maintaining group cohesion. This required sophisticated social rules about relationships and reproduction that demonstrate remarkable understanding of genetics long before the science existed. The psychological sophistication required to maintain these social bonds under extreme stress cannot be understated. Living in small groups under life-threatening conditions for months at a time requires emotional intelligence, conflict resolution skills, and psychological resilience that speaks to remarkable mental and emotional evolution. Their artistic and symbolic activities, while limited compared to later human cultures, show evidence of shared cultural values and possibly religious or spiritual beliefs. The creation of decorative objects and the use of pigments for body decoration or cave art suggests cultural traditions that serve to maintain group identity and social cohesion. The ultimate test of Neanderthal social bonds was their ability to sustain stable communities for nearly 500,000 years through multiple ice ages, volcanic winters, and environmental catastrophes. No other human species achieved this level of social resilience under comparable conditions. They had proven that survival isn't just about individual adaptation. It's about collective strength, mutual support, and social bonds that can overcome any environmental challenge. In the ultimate test of human cooperation, they had created societies that could endure anything the world could throw at them. Chapter 7. Innovation Under Pressure. The young Neanderthal woman held the small piece of birch bark over the carefully controlled fire, watching as it began to smoke and char. She wasn't cooking food or making light. She was performing chemistry. Through trial and error passed down through generations, her people had discovered that heating birch bark in precisely the right conditions would produce a sticky, waterproof substance that could bind stone points to wooden shafts more effectively than any natural adhesive. She was making tar, and she was doing it 80,000 years before humans supposedly invented complex chemistry. This scene, repeated thousands of times across Ice Age Europe, represents one of the most remarkable aspects of Neanderthal survival: their extraordinary capacity for innovation under extreme pressure. For nearly 400,000 years, when faced with challenges that would have driven most species to extinction, Neanderthals responded not with desperation, but with creativity. They became inventors, engineers, and problem solvers whose innovations were so effective that they sustained entire civilizations through Earth's most challenging climate periods. Understanding Neanderthal innovation requires appreciating the context in which it occurred. These weren't people with leisure time to experiment and tinker. Every day was a struggle for survival in conditions that pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. Yet somehow, in the midst of this desperate struggle, they found ways to continuously improve their technology, develop new solutions to old problems, and create innovations that gave them decisive advantages in the Ice Age world. Their mastery of adhesive technology represents one of the most sophisticated chemical processes achieved by any prehistoric culture. The production of birch bark tar requires heating birch bark to specific temperatures in oxygen-free environments, a process that modern chemists describe as destructive distillation. Neanderthals had to discover not just that this was possible, but how to control temperature, manage oxygen levels, and time the process perfectly to achieve consistent results. Recent experimental archaeology attempting to replicate Neanderthal tar production has shown just how sophisticated this technology was. Modern researchers, working with detailed instructions and scientific understanding of the chemical processes involved, often require multiple attempts to successfully produce usable tar. Neanderthals were doing this routinely, teaching the process to their children and achieving quality levels that enabled them to create composite tools that significantly enhanced their hunting and survival capabilities. But adhesive technology was just the beginning. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals continuously innovated their tool-making techniques in response to changing environmental pressures. During periods of extreme cold, they developed specialized cold weather tools with improved grip surfaces and enhanced durability. During periods when high-quality stone was scarce, they created techniques for maximizing the utility of lower-grade materials. Their approach to raw material management shows innovation that would be impressive in modern industrial contexts. At sites like Maastricht Belvedere, archaeologists found evidence of sophisticated recycling systems where broken tools were systematically reworked into new implements. Nothing was wasted, and everything was optimized for maximum utility. They developed techniques for extending tool life, repairing damaged implements, and even creating specialized tools for making other tools. Perhaps most remarkably, they began to innovate their hunting techniques in response to changes in prey behavior and environmental conditions. As Ice Age animals adapted their own survival strategies, Neanderthals responded with new hunting technologies and tactics. Archaeological evidence shows the development of increasingly sophisticated trap systems, improved projectile technologies, and hunting strategies that could overcome the adaptive responses of their prey. The famous wooden spears from Gningen represent just one example of this adaptive innovation. These weren't crude pointed sticks. They were precision-engineered weapons with carefully calculated weight distributions, balanced proportions, and specialized tip designs optimized for different types of prey. The longest spears were designed for thrusting attacks on large, dangerous animals. Shorter spears were balanced for throwing at medium-range targets. The variety and sophistication of these weapons show a level of engineering optimization that rivals modern sports equipment design. Their fire technology evolved far beyond simple heating and cooking. Evidence from multiple sites shows that Neanderthals developed specialized fire-making techniques for different purposes. They created high-temperature fires for heat-treating stone tools, low-temperature fires for smoking and preserving meat, and carefully controlled fires for producing tar and processing other materials. They had essentially developed industrial-scale fire management that could support complex manufacturing processes. The innovation extended to their shelter technology as well. As climate conditions became more extreme, Neanderthal communities responded with increasingly sophisticated construction techniques. They developed methods for creating better insulation, improving ventilation systems, and building structures that could withstand severe weather conditions. Archaeological evidence shows continuous refinement of building techniques over thousands of years, with each generation improving upon the innovations of their predecessors. Their clothing technology, while leaving limited archaeological evidence, shows clear signs of continuous innovation. Cut marks on animal bones reveal increasingly sophisticated butchering techniques designed to maximize the utility of hides for clothing and shelter materials. The development of specialized hide processing tools shows that they were continuously improving their ability to create warm, durable clothing from available materials. But perhaps their most impressive innovation was in the realm of logistics and organization. Managing resources across seasonal cycles in environments where miscalculation meant death required sophisticated planning and organizational capabilities. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthal groups developed increasingly complex systems for food storage, tool catching, and resource management that enabled them to survive extended periods of scarcity. Sites like Abrik Romani show evidence of what can only be described as inventory management systems. Different types of tools and materials were stored in specific locations according to systematic organizational principles. Raw materials were stockpiled according to seasonal availability. Finished tools were maintained in ready-to-use condition for immediate deployment when needed. This level of organizational sophistication represents innovation in management and logistics that enabled complex survival strategies. Their approach to knowledge preservation and transmission shows remarkable innovation in education and cultural transfer. The evidence suggests that Neanderthal communities developed sophisticated methods for ensuring that critical knowledge was passed from generation to generation. Tool-making sites show evidence of structured learning environments where experienced craftsmen taught complex skills to younger community members. This educational innovation went beyond simple demonstration and imitation. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthal communities created specialized learning tools and practice materials that allowed students to develop skills without wasting valuable resources. They had essentially developed educational technologies that optimized knowledge transfer while minimizing resource consumption. Their innovation in food processing and preservation represents another area of remarkable achievement. Chemical analysis of food remains from Neanderthal sites shows evidence of sophisticated preparation techniques that maximize nutritional extraction and extended storage life. They developed methods for processing plants that made otherwise inedible materials nutritious and digestible. They created meat preservation techniques that could maintain protein sources through extended winter periods. The seasonal storage systems they developed show innovation in food science that rivals modern preservation techniques. They used natural refrigeration controlled fermentation, and dehydration methods to create food stores that could sustain communities through months of scarcity. Some evidence suggests they may have even developed early forms of food catching that involved multiple storage locations distributed across their territories. Their medical knowledge and innovation deserve special recognition. Evidence from skeletal remains shows that Neanderthal communities developed sophisticated treatments for injuries and medical conditions. Bone healing patterns suggest the use of splints, poultices, and other medical interventions that significantly improved survival rates for injured individuals. Recent analysis of dental remains has revealed evidence that Neanderthals were using medicinal plants and possibly performing dental procedures. Scratch marks on teeth and chemical residues suggest the use of toothpicks and medicinal substances that indicate understanding of dental hygiene and pain management that was far ahead of its time. Their innovation in communication technology, while not directly preserved in the archaeological record, can be inferred from the complexity of their social coordination and knowledge transfer. The ability to teach complex skills, coordinate large-scale hunts, and maintain trade relationships across vast distances required communication innovations that enabled precise information transfer and long-term social coordination. The artistic and symbolic innovations that appeared in later Neanderthal cultures represent another area of remarkable achievement. The use of pigments for body decoration, the creation of decorative objects, and possibly even early forms of cave art show that even under extreme survival pressure, Neanderthal communities found ways to innovate in areas beyond immediate practical utility. Their approach to territorial management shows innovation in resource optimization that enabled sustainable use of limited environments. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthal groups developed sophisticated systems for managing hunting territories, preventing overexploitation of resources, and maintaining ecological balance that could support communities over extended periods. The weapons technology they developed near the end of their tenure shows remarkable innovation in response to increasing competitive pressure. Some evidence suggests the development of composite weapons, improved projectile systems, and specialized hunting equipment that represented significant advances over earlier Neanderthal technology. By 40,000 years ago, when modern humans began arriving in Europe, Neanderthal communities were at the peak of their innovative capabilities. They had developed technological and cultural systems that had sustained them through multiple ice ages and enabled them to thrive in some of the most challenging environments humans had ever encountered. Their innovations weren't just survival responses. They were creative solutions that demonstrated remarkable intellectual capabilities and problem-solving abilities. They had proven that innovation and creativity could flourish even under the most extreme pressure, and that human ingenuity could overcome any environmental challenge through continuous adaptation and improvement. The legacy of Neanderthal innovation extends far beyond their own survival. Many of the basic technological and organizational principles they developed, from composite tool construction to systematic resource management to structured knowledge transfer, became fundamental elements of all subsequent human cultures. They had shown that innovation isn't just about leisure and abundance. It is about the human capacity to find creative solutions to impossible problems and to continuously improve and adapt in the face of any challenge. Chapter 8. Weathering the Worst volcanic winter had lasted 3 years. Ash from the massive Campanian ignimbrite eruption in southern Italy had darkened skies across Europe, blocking sunlight and dropping temperatures to levels that killed most plant and animal life. Rivers froze solid. The few surviving animals huddled in whatever shelter they could find, slowly starving as the ecosystem collapsed around them. This was 39,000 years ago, during one of the most catastrophic climate events in human history. Yet, in a rock shelter in what would one day become France, a small group of Neanderthals not only survived, they continued to thrive, hunt, make tools, and raise children as if the apocalypse happening outside was just another challenge to overcome. This scene represents the ultimate test of Neanderthal resilience. For nearly 400,000 years, they had faced ice age after ice age, survived countless climate catastrophes, and endured conditions that would challenge modern technology. But the period from 60,000 to 40,000 years ago brought challenges that pushed even their remarkable survival capabilities to the absolute limit. These were the worst decades in European climate history since Neanderthals had arrived, and how they responded tells us everything we need to know about human adaptability under impossible conditions. The climate data from this period reads like a catalog of natural disasters. Massive volcanic eruptions blocked sunlight for years at a time. Temperature swings of 20 degrees Fahrenheit could happen within a few decades. Ice sheets advanced and retreated with devastating speed, destroying established ecosystems and forcing complete reorganization of plant and animal communities. Ocean currents shifted, changing weather patterns across entire continents. This wasn't just climate change. It was climate chaos. The Campanian ignimbrite eruption represents perhaps the single worst climate disaster that any human population has ever survived. The eruption ejected so much ash and sulfur compounds into the atmosphere that it created a nuclear winter effect that lasted for years. Sunlight was reduced by up to 75% across much of Europe. Temperatures dropped so severely that growing seasons were eliminated entirely in many regions. Ash-contaminated water supplies made breathing difficult and covered the landscape with a toxic gray blanket that killed vegetation and made hunting nearly impossible. Modern climate models suggest that this single event should have caused the extinction of any human population in Europe. The combination of extreme cold, darkness, contaminated air and water, and collapsed ecosystems created conditions that were literally unprecedented in human evolutionary history. Yet archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthal populations not only survived this catastrophe, they maintained their cultural traditions, continued technological innovation, and emerged from the volcanic winter with their societies intact. How did they do it? The answer lies in understanding that by 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals had developed survival systems so robust and adaptable that they could withstand even planetary-scale disasters. Their response to the volcanic winter demonstrates crisis management capabilities that would be impressive in modern emergency response organizations. First, they had developed food storage and preservation systems that could sustain communities through extended periods when hunting and gathering became impossible. Archaeological evidence from this period shows massive food storage sites with preserved meat, processed plant materials, and cached resources that could feed entire groups for months without resupply. They had essentially created emergency supply systems that anticipated and prepared for worst-case scenarios. Their shelter technology proved crucial during the volcanic winter. The advanced heating and insulation systems they had developed over hundreds of thousands of years enabled them to maintain habitable living spaces even when outside temperatures dropped to levels that would quickly kill exposed humans. Their ventilation systems filtered contaminated air. Their heating systems conserved precious fuel, and their construction techniques created sealed environments that could protect families from toxic atmospheric conditions. But perhaps most importantly, their social systems provided the organizational structure necessary to coordinate survival efforts during extended crisis periods. The cooperative networks they had developed enabled resource sharing across multiple communities, coordinated responses to changing conditions, and maintained group morale during years when the future looked hopeless. The psychological challenge of surviving volcanic winter cannot be understated. Imagine living for years under dark skies, breathing contaminated air, watching familiar landscapes transform into alien wastelands and facing daily uncertainty about whether conditions would ever improve. The mental and emotional stress of such conditions would break most individuals and destroy most social groups. Yet Neanderthal communities maintained their cohesion and continued normal social activities throughout this period. Evidence from sites like Grotte du Renne shows that even during the worst climate conditions, Neanderthal groups continued toolmaking, maintained their shelters, and engaged in cultural activities that suggest stable, functioning societies. They weren't just surviving, they were maintaining civilization in the face of planetary catastrophe. Their adaptation to the volcanic winter required flexibility and innovation that demonstrates remarkable intellectual capabilities. As traditional food sources disappeared, they developed new hunting and foraging strategies that could exploit whatever resources remained available. As familiar landscapes were transformed, they modified their territorial ranges and movement patterns to optimize survival in changed conditions. The Heinrich events, massive ice sheet collapses that occurred multiple times during this period, created additional challenges that tested every aspect of Neanderthal survival technology. These events caused rapid sea level changes, altered river courses, and created massive flooding that could destroy established territories overnight. Yet archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthal communities successfully adapted to these dramatic landscape changes, relocating when necessary and rebuilding when possible. Their response to the Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles, rapid climate oscillations that could change regional temperatures by 15 degrees Fahrenheit within decades, demonstrates adaptive capabilities that rival any in human history. These climate swings happened so quickly that ecosystems couldn't adapt, forcing human populations to completely reorganize their survival strategies within single lifetimes. Traditional hunting became nearly impossible during the worst periods, as large game animals either died off or migrated far from traditional territories. Neanderthal groups responded by developing new subsistence strategies that could exploit whatever resources remained available. They increased their reliance on small game, developed new techniques for processing marginal plant foods, and created fishing and shellfish gathering technologies that could provide protein from aquatic resources. Their tool technology evolved rapidly during this period in response to changing survival requirements. Archaeological evidence shows the development of specialized tools for processing new types of foods, extracting resources from hostile environments, and maintaining equipment under extreme conditions. They created tools for ice fishing, for processing frozen meat, for working in contaminated environments, and for maintaining fires with limited fuel supplies. The logistical challenges of surviving extended crisis periods required organizational innovations that demonstrate sophisticated management capabilities. Communities had to coordinate resource gathering, manage food distribution, maintain equipment inventories, and organize work assignments, all while dealing with environmental conditions that made normal activities extremely difficult. Their medical knowledge proved crucial during periods when environmental stress increased injury rates and disease susceptibility. Evidence suggests that Neanderthal communities maintained sophisticated understanding of medicinal plants and treatment techniques that enabled them to maintain health standards even under extreme conditions. The territorial management strategies they developed during this period show remarkable adaptability to rapidly changing conditions. As traditional territories became uninhabitable, groups had to negotiate new arrangements, establish temporary settlements, and maintain social relationships across much greater distances than ever before. Perhaps most remarkably, they maintained their cultural traditions throughout these crisis periods. Archaeological evidence shows continuation of tool-making styles, burial practices, and social customs that demonstrate cultural resilience under extreme pressure. They weren't just surviving as individuals, they were preserving entire ways of life through the worst conditions in European history. The trade networks they had developed proved crucial during resource scarcity periods. Groups with access to specific resources could share with communities facing shortages, creating mutual support systems that enhanced survival chances for entire regions. These networks required trust, communication, and long-term commitment that could survive years of crisis conditions. Their knowledge preservation systems ensured that crucial survival information was maintained and transmitted even when communities were under extreme stress. The sophisticated skills required for fire-making, tool production, food processing, and medical treatment had to be preserved and passed to younger generations, even when normal education activities were disrupted by crisis conditions stopped by 40,000 years ago. When the worst of these climate catastrophes had passed, Neanderthal communities had proven themselves capable of surviving literally anything the planet could throw at them. They had endured volcanic winters, ice age oscillations, ecosystem collapses, and environmental conditions that would challenge modern, industrial societies. The genetic evidence from this period shows that while Neanderthal populations were stressed by these extreme conditions, they maintained enough diversity and numbers to continue as viable communities. This suggests that their survival strategies were not just temporarily effective, but sustainable over extended periods of extreme hardship. Their success in weathering the worst climate conditions in European history represents one of the greatest achievements in human survival. They had proven that intelligence, cooperation, innovation, and resilience could overcome literally any environmental challenge. They had survived conditions that modern climate scientists describe as barely compatible with human life. Yet just as they were emerging from this period of ultimate crisis, having proven their ability to survive anything nature could create, they faced a different kind of challenge, one that wouldn't come from the environment, but from other humans. The worst was behind them, but their greatest test was just beginning. The climate catastrophes of 60,000 to 40,000 years ago had pushed Neanderthals to the absolute limits of human survival capability. They had not just endured, they had prevailed. They had shown that no environmental challenge, no matter how severe, could defeat human determination and ingenuity when applied with intelligence and cooperation. They had weathered the worst, and in doing so, they had earned their place as history's ultimate survivors. Chapter 9. The Art of Endurance in the Depths of Bruniquel Cave in southern France. 176,000 years ago, a group of Neanderthals worked by flickering torchlight to create something that served no practical purpose for survival. Using only stone tools, they carefully broke hundreds of stalagmites and arranged them in mysterious ring patterns deep in the cave's interior. The construction required planning, coordination, and hours of dangerous work in complete darkness, far from natural light. When they finished, they lit fires within the rings, filling the underground chamber with smoke and light in what can only be described as humanity's first known architectural project with purely symbolic purpose. This scene reveals perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Neanderthal survival: their ability to maintain not just physical existence, but cultural richness and spiritual depth through nearly 400,000 years of the harshest conditions in human history. They didn't just endure Ice Age Europe, they created meaning, beauty, and culture that sustained the human spirit through epochs of struggle that would have broken lesser beings. The Bruniquel cave structures represent just one example of what archaeologists are discovering about Neanderthal cultural sophistication. These weren't primitive survival machines mindlessly struggling through each day. These were people who found ways to create art, practice ritual, express individuality, and maintained traditions that gave meaning to their lives beyond mere survival. They had mastered what might be called the art of endurance, the ability to not just survive, but to thrive psychologically and culturally under conditions that challenged the very essence of human existence. Understanding Neanderthal culture requires looking beyond the basic tools and shelters to see evidence of activities that serve no immediate survival purpose, yet were clearly important enough to justify significant investment of time, energy, and resources. The eagle talons found at Krapina in Croatia, carefully modified and showing wear patterns consistent with use as jewelry or ceremonial objects, date to 130,000 years ago. These artifacts represent some of the earliest evidence of symbolic behavior in human evolution, and they were created by people living under Ice Age conditions that left little room for luxury. The use of pigments by Neanderthal communities reveals another dimension of their cultural sophistication. At over 70 sites across Europe, archaeologists have found evidence of red and black pigments that were collected, processed, and used by Neanderthal groups, while modern humans used similar pigments for cave paintings and body decoration. The exact purpose of Neanderthal pigment use remains mysterious. However, the consistent pattern across time and geography suggests cultural practices that were maintained over hundreds of thousands of years. Recent analysis of pigment residues on shells found at Spanish sites, dating to 115,000 years ago, shows that Neanderthals were mixing colors, creating palettes, and possibly engaging in body painting or other decorative activities. The shells themselves had to be collected from coastal areas and transported inland, suggesting that these cultural activities were important enough to justify significant effort and resource investment. The burial practices of Neanderthals provide perhaps the most compelling evidence of their spiritual and emotional depth. While not as elaborate as those of later human cultures, Neanderthal burials show clear evidence of intentional, meaningful treatment of the dead. The famous burial at Shananur Cave in Iraq, where an individual was interred with what appears to be medicinal plants and flowers, suggests beliefs about death that went beyond simple disposal of bodies. At La Chapelle aux Saints in France, the elderly Neanderthal, known as the Old Man, was buried in a carefully prepared grave with tools and animal bones that may have been intended for use in an afterlife. The deliberate nature of these burials, the positioning of bodies, and the inclusion of grave goods all point to belief systems that addressed fundamental questions about death, meaning, and possibly continuation after life. But perhaps most remarkably, some Neanderthal burials show evidence of grief rituals that demonstrate profound emotional sophistication. At Kafsa Cave in Israel, the burial of a Neanderthal child shows evidence of repeated visits and possible offerings that suggest ongoing mourning practices. The psychological complexity required to maintain these practices under survival conditions that left little time for anything beyond immediate necessities speaks to remarkable emotional and cultural development. The musical capabilities of Neanderthals remain a subject of scientific debate, but the famous Divje Babe flute from Slovenia, a cave bear femur with carefully placed holes that could produce musical tones, suggests that even 43,000 years ago, Neanderthal communities may have been creating music. While some researchers argue that the holes were made by carnivore teeth, others maintain that the spacing and size of the openings are too precise to be accidental. Whether or not the Divje Babe artifact is truly a musical instrument, the possibility that Neanderthals created music opens fascinating questions about their cultural life. Music serves no immediate survival purpose, yet it provides psychological benefits that could be crucial for maintaining morale and group cohesion during extended periods of hardship. The ability to create beauty and emotional expression through sound could have been a crucial component of their survival strategy. The cave art potentially created by Neanderthals represents another area of cultural achievement that challenges our understanding of their capabilities. At Cueva de los Aviones in Spain, handprints and geometric patterns on cave walls date to over 65,000 years ago, long before modern humans arrived in the region. While the attribution of these artworks to Neanderthals remains controversial, the possibility that they were creating representational art adds another dimension to their cultural sophistication. The geometric patterns found at sites like Garam's Cave in Gibraltar show evidence of intentional design and symbolic thinking. These aren't random scratches. They're deliberate patterns that required planning, execution, and possibly symbolic meaning. The fact that similar patterns appear at multiple sites suggests shared cultural traditions that were maintained across different communities and time periods. Their personal ornamentation practices reveal individual expression and cultural identity that goes far beyond basic survival needs. At multiple sites across Europe, archaeologists have found evidence of Neanderthals collecting and modifying unusual objects, crystals, fossils, interesting stones, and shells that serve no practical purpose but may have been valued for their beauty or symbolic meaning. The perforated shells and animal teeth found at various Neanderthal sites show clear evidence of modification for use as beads or pendants. These objects required significant time and skill to create, yet they served no survival function. Their presence suggests that even under the extreme pressures of Ice Age life, Neanderthals found ways to express individuality and create personal adornment that enhanced their sense of identity and belonging. The maintenance of cultural traditions over vast time periods demonstrates remarkable cultural stability and knowledge transmission systems. Tool-making styles that remain consistent for tens of thousands of years suggest cultural practices that were so deeply embedded they survived countless generations of environmental challenges and population pressures. The Chattel-Peronian culture, associated with late Neanderthal populations, shows evidence of rapid cultural innovation and adaptation that demonstrates remarkable flexibility and creativity. New tool types, ornament styles, and possibly even early forms of art appear in the archaeological record from this period, suggesting that even as Neanderthal populations faced increasing pressure, they continued to innovate and create. The social rituals implied by their living sites reveal complex cultural practices that went beyond basic cooperation. The spatial organization of their settlements suggests designated areas for different activities, not just practical work, but possibly social gathering, ritual activities, and cultural transmission. The hearth arrangements at sites like Abric Romani suggest that fire served social and possibly ceremonial functions. Beyond simple heating and cooking, their treatment of special objects and places indicates belief systems that attributed meaning and significance to aspects of their environment. Beyond immediate utility, certain caves were used repeatedly over thousands of years for activities that left little practical evidence but suggest ritual or ceremonial importance. The collection and curation of unusual objects, fossils, crystals, and interesting stones suggests appreciation for beauty and possibly spiritual significance. The knowledge systems they developed and maintained represent cultural achievements that rival any in human history. The detailed understanding of plant properties required for medicine, the sophisticated knowledge of animal behavior needed for successful hunting, and the complex technical skills required for tool-making all had to be preserved and transmitted across generations through oral tradition and practical demonstration. Their educational practices reveal cultural commitments that went far beyond immediate survival needs. The evidence suggests that experienced individuals spent significant time and resources teaching complex skills to younger community members, even when this meant reduced productivity for immediate survival needs. This investment in education represents cultural values that prioritized long-term community welfare over short-term individual advantage. The seasonal ceremonies and gatherings implied by certain archaeological sites suggest cultural practices that brought dispersed communities together for social, economic, and possibly spiritual purposes. The logistics of organizing such gatherings under Ice Age conditions would have required significant planning and resource commitment. Yet the evidence suggests these activities were important enough to justify the costs. Their response to landscape features reveals possible spiritual or aesthetic appreciation that goes beyond practical considerations. Certain elevated locations, unusual rock formations, and distinctive landscape features show evidence of repeated Neanderthal visits that suggest cultural significance beyond simple resource exploitation. The psychological resilience required to maintain these cultural practices under conditions of constant environmental stress demonstrates remarkable mental and emotional strength. The ability to find meaning, create beauty, and maintain hope during the darkest periods of Ice Age Europe speaks to human spiritual resources that transcend immediate survival needs. Their cultural legacy, while often overlooked in discussions of human evolution, represents achievements in art, spirituality, and cultural development that laid crucial foundations for all subsequent human civilization. The capacity for symbolic thinking, artistic expression, spiritual belief, and cultural transmission that they developed under extreme conditions became fundamental aspects of human nature that continue to define our species today. By the time modern humans began arriving in Europe 45,000 years ago, Neanderthal communities had developed cultural traditions and spiritual practices that had sustained them through nearly 400,000 years of Ice Age challenges. They had proven that human beings are not just survival machines, but cultural creatures who can create meaning, beauty, and spiritual depth even under the most impossible conditions. They had mastered the art of endurance, not just physical survival, but the maintenance of everything that makes existence meaningful and human. In the ultimate test of cultural resilience, they had shown that the human spirit could not only survive, but flourish in the face of any challenge. Their cultural achievements represent one of humanity's greatest success stories, and their legacy continues to inspire and inform our understanding of what it means to be truly human. Chapter 10. The competition arrives 35,000 years ago. On a windswept plateau in what would one day become Germany, two groups of humans encountered each other for the first time. On one side stood a band of Neanderthals, stocky, powerful, perfectly adapted to the Ice Age environment they had called home for nearly 400,000 years. Their tools were sophisticated, their survival skills unmatched, their knowledge of the local environment encyclopedic. On the other side stood a group of anatomically modern humans, taller, more lightly built, recent arrivals from Africa, who had spent the last several thousand years spreading across Asia and finally reaching the edges of Neanderthal territory. This meeting, repeated countless times across Europe and Western Asia over the next several thousand years, would ultimately determine the fate of two human species. For the first time in their long history, Neanderthals faced competition not from climate, predators, or environmental disasters, but from other humans. The ultimate Ice Age survivors were about to face their greatest challenge yet, and this time, their opponents weren't playing by the rules that had governed survival for the previous 400,000 years. The arrival of modern humans in Europe around 45,000 years ago marked the beginning of the end of the Neanderthal world. But understanding what happened requires abandoning simple narratives about superior humans, replacing inferior ones. The reality was far more complex, involving not just competition, but also cooperation, interbreeding, and a gradual process of replacement that took thousands of years and varied dramatically across different regions. The modern humans who entered Europe weren't necessarily more intelligent than Neanderthals, nor were they obviously better adapted to Ice Age conditions. In fact, in many ways, they were at significant disadvantages. Their lighter build made them less suited to extreme cold. Their lack of familiarity with European environments meant they were essentially immigrants trying to survive in territories that Neanderthals knew intimately. Their tool technology, while different, wasn't necessarily superior to Neanderthal innovations. So what advantages did these newcomers possess that would eventually tip the balance in their favor? The answer lies not in individual capabilities, but in population dynamics, social organization, and subtle differences in adaptability that became crucial over extended time periods. First, and most importantly, modern humans arrived in Europe with significant numerical advantages. Genetic evidence suggests that the founding populations of modern humans in Europe were much larger than existing Neanderthal populations. While Neanderthal groups typically numbered in the dozens, early modern human communities may have included hundreds or even thousands of individuals. This population difference meant that modern humans could sustain losses from conflicts, disease, or environmental disasters that would devastate smaller Neanderthal communities. The demographic implications were profound. Larger populations meant more genetic diversity, reducing the risks of inbreeding that had begun to affect some Neanderthal groups. More individuals meant more innovative minds working on survival problems, increasing the rate of technological and cultural development. Larger groups could support greater specialization, allowing individuals to focus on specific skills that benefited the entire community. But numbers alone don't explain the success of modern humans in Europe. Their social organization appears to have differed from Neanderthal patterns in ways that provided crucial advantages for expansion and competition. Archaeological evidence suggests that modern human groups maintained more extensive trade networks, covering greater distances and involving more communities than Neanderthal exchange systems. These expanded social networks meant that modern human communities could draw resources and support from much larger areas than Neanderthal groups. When local resources became scarce, modern humans could rely on trade relationships that spanned hundreds of kilometers. When local populations faced disasters, they could receive assistance from distant relatives and allies. This extended social support system provided resilience that smaller, more isolated Neanderthal communities couldn't match. The technological differences between the two populations were subtle but significant. While Neanderthal stone tools were often superior in quality and durability, modern human technology showed greater diversity and innovation. The Upper Paleolithic tool traditions associated with early modern humans included a wider variety of specialized implements, more sophisticated projectile systems, and faster rates of technological change. Perhaps most importantly, modern humans developed more advanced projectile technology that allowed them to hunt at greater distances with reduced risk. While Neanderthals were master hunters who could bring down Ice Age megafauna with close-range weapons, modern humans developed throwing spears, atlatls, and possibly even early bow and arrow systems that made hunting safer and more efficient. This technological advantage had cascading effects on population sustainability. Safer hunting meant fewer injuries and deaths among hunters, allowing communities to maintain larger numbers of productive adults. More efficient hunting meant better nutrition for pregnant women and children, leading to higher survival rates and population growth. The cumulative effect of these advantages was subtle but decisive over extended time periods. The cultural differences between Neanderthals and modern humans may have been equally important. Modern humans showed evidence of more complex symbolic behavior, more elaborate artistic expression, and more sophisticated ritual activities. While these cultural developments might seem irrelevant to survival, they actually served crucial functions in maintaining group cohesion, facilitating trade relationships, and supporting larger social networks. The extensive cave art, musical instruments, and decorative objects created by early modern humans weren't just artistic achievements. They were social technologies that helped maintain cultural identity across large, dispersed populations. These cultural innovations allowed modern human communities to maintain cooperation and mutual support across greater distances and longer time periods than simpler social systems could sustain. Climate change played a crucial role in the competition between Neanderthals and modern humans. The period from 45,000 to 35,000 years ago was characterized by extreme climate instability, with rapid oscillations between cold and warm periods that disrupted established ecosystems and forced both populations to adapt to constantly changing conditions. While Neanderthals had proven their ability to survive climate catastrophes, their survival strategies were optimized for stable territorial control and intimate knowledge of local environments. Modern humans, as recent immigrants with more flexible social systems, may have been better adapted to the rapid environmental changes that characterized this period. The geographic pattern of Neanderthal extinction provides important clues about the nature of competition between the two populations. Neanderthals didn't disappear simultaneously across all of Europe. Instead, they gradually retreated from northern and central regions while maintaining populations in southern refugia like Spain and southern Italy for thousands of years after modern humans had become established elsewhere. This pattern suggests that competition was primarily about access to resources rather than direct conflict. As modern human populations expanded and established themselves in prime territories, Neanderthal groups were gradually pushed into increasingly marginal environments where their specialized survival skills were less effective and their small population sizes became critical vulnerabilities. The evidence for direct interaction between Neanderthals and modern humans is limited but significant. Genetic analysis has revealed that interbreeding occurred between the two populations, with most modern humans carrying 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. This genetic legacy suggests that relationships between the groups included not just competition, but also cooperation and peaceful interaction. Some archaeological sites show evidence of cultural exchange between Neanderthals and modern humans. The Chattel-Peronian culture, associated with late Neanderthal populations, includes tool types and ornamental objects that may have been influenced by contact with modern human groups. This suggests that Neanderthals were capable of adopting and adapting innovations from their competitors, even as they faced increasing pressure from expanding modern human populations. The disease factor may have played a crucial role in Neanderthal decline. Modern humans arriving from Africa and Asia would have carried pathogens to which Neanderthal populations had no immunity. Small, isolated populations are particularly vulnerable to epidemic diseases, and the introduction of new pathogens could have devastated Neanderthal communities while having minimal impact on larger, modern human populations. The timing of Neanderthal extinction varies significantly across different regions, suggesting that local factors were crucial in determining outcomes. In some areas, Neanderthal populations may have been absorbed into modern human communities through interbreeding. In other regions, they may have been displaced by direct competition for resources. In still others, they may have succumbed to disease, climate change, or simple demographic bad luck. The technological arms race between Neanderthals and modern humans accelerated during the final millennia of coexistence. Both populations showed evidence of rapid innovation and cultural change during this period, suggesting that competition was driving technological development on both sides. Neanderthal tool technology became more sophisticated, while modern human weapon systems became more advanced. But ultimately, the advantages that had served Neanderthals so well during 400,000 years of Ice Age — survival, specialized cold adaptations, intimate territorial knowledge, small group social organization — became disadvantages in the new competitive environment created by modern human expansion. Their evolutionary success had locked them into strategies that worked perfectly for environmental challenges, but proved inadequate for interspecies competition. The psychological impact of competition may have been equally important. Neanderthal societies had evolved under conditions where their primary challenges came from the environment rather than other humans. Their social systems, cultural practices, and survival strategies were all optimized for dealing with climate, predators, and resource scarcity, not for competing with other human societies. Modern humans, having spent thousands of years migrating through territories occupied by other human groups, may have been better adapted to intergroup competition and resource conflicts. Their social systems had evolved to deal with human competitors as well as environmental challenges, giving them crucial advantages in the new competitive landscape of Ice Age Europe. By 30,000 years ago, Neanderthal populations had been reduced to small refugia in southern Europe. The last known Neanderthal sites date to around 28,000 years ago in Spain and Portugal, where isolated populations persisted for several thousand years after modern humans had become dominant throughout the rest of Europe. The final extinction of Neanderthals wasn't the result of a single catastrophic event, but rather the culmination of thousands of years of gradual replacement, demographic pressure, and environmental change. They had survived ice ages, volcanic winters, and climate catastrophes that would challenge modern industrial societies. But they couldn't survive competition from other humans who played by different rules and possessed different advantages. The irony is profound. The ultimate Ice Age survivors, who had proven their ability to overcome any environmental challenge, were ultimately defeated not by nature, but by their own evolutionary cousins. The very specializations that had made them masters of Ice Age Europe became limitations in a world where flexibility and social connectivity mattered more than perfect environmental adaptation. Their defeat marked the end of an era, not just the extinction of a species, but the close of humanity's longest and most successful survival story. As we reach the end of this incredible journey through 400,000 years of Neanderthal survival, it's worth reflecting on what we've learned about human resilience, adaptation, and the price of success. The Neanderthals weren't just another extinct species. They were humanity's greatest survivors, masters of conditions that would challenge our modern industrial civilization. Think about what they accomplished. They survived multiple ice ages that lasted hundreds of thousands of years. They adapted to volcanic winters that blocked sunlight and devastated ecosystems. They developed technologies that allowed them to hunt massive predators with Stone Age tools. They created social systems that sustained communities through centuries of isolation and hardship. They built shelters that could withstand Arctic conditions and maintain fires through the longest, darkest winters in human history. Yet, their story ended not with environmental catastrophe, but with the arrival of their own evolutionary cousins. The ultimate irony of the Neanderthal story is that the Ice Age survivors who could overcome any natural challenge couldn't survive competition from other humans. Their specialized perfection became their limitation when the rules of survival changed, but their legacy lives on in ways both literal and profound. Every person of European or Asian descent carries Neanderthal DNA, genetic gifts that continue to influence our immune systems, our physical characteristics, and even aspects of our mental capabilities. We are, quite literally, part Neanderthal, inheriting both their genetic material and their survival legacy. More importantly, their achievements laid the foundation for everything that followed in human history. The basic technologies they perfected: fire control, stone tools, shelter construction, hunting strategies, became the building blocks of all subsequent human development. The social cooperation, cultural transmission, and innovative problem-solving that characterized their societies established patterns that continue to define human civilization. Their story provides crucial lessons for our own time. As we face climate change, resource challenges, and technological disruption, we can learn from both their successes and their ultimate failure. They showed us the importance of adaptation, innovation, and social cooperation in survival. But they also demonstrated that even the most successful survival strategies have limits, and that flexibility may be more important than perfection. The Neanderthals remind us that survival is never guaranteed, no matter how well adapted we think we are. They also remind us of the extraordinary human capacity for resilience, creativity, and determination in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. Their 400,000-year battle with Ice Age, Europe was humanity's longest and most successful survival story. Though they ultimately lost, their legacy of adaptation, innovation, and endurance continues in every human who faces adversity with courage and creativity. The Ice Warriors are gone, but their spirit of survival lives on in us.